I'd always been a good sleeper. Then my girlfriend Mia left suddenly. She said my sleep talking freaked her out. At first I didn't think much of it. People talk in their sleep. But Mia was shaken. That bothered me. She wouldn't tell me what I'd been saying. I tried to convince her to come back, but I decided to figure it out myself. She hadn't seemed like the type to leave, especially over something like sleep talking. We've been living together for almost 2 years, and we never had any major issues. Her sudden departure felt off, and her unwillingness to explain made it worse. She only told me that it wasn't she said I was saying things, but it wasn't me. She left. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. I don't understand. What did I say? I asked. She didn't answer. She left. I set up my phone to record while I slept. The first few nights were uneventful. Just the usual nonsense. I thought I'd just mumble about work, a TV show, or my dog. But I kept recording, thinking maybe something would come up. If I could catch myself saying something weird, I could laugh about it and send it to Mia as a joke. Maybe then she'd come back, realizing she'd overreacted. I wasn't prepared for what I found. By the third night, I was bored. I was talking gibberish and Buddy was breathing heavily. On the fourth night, I barely checked the recording. On the fifth night, something changed. I was restless and tossed and turned for hours. I finally fell asleep in the morning. I didn't check the recording, but I wanted to know if there was anything unusual. When I played the audio back, everything started as usual. Then around 3 a.m., there was a low, raspy sound. I thought it was just Buddy, but then I remembered something that made me afraid. Buddy had been staying at M's mom's place all week. I rewound the audio, turning up the volume. There was again this slow, heavy breathing, much louder than I'd expect from a dog. It sounded wrong. Then I heard a voice. It was low and distorted. It was coming from deep within the recording. I froze. My heart started pounding. I felt a cold sweat form on my forehead. I rewound the audio, playing it back again and again. The voice was unmistakable. It wasn't me. It was deeper, darker, like a growl. Whatever was breathing and talking wasn't me or Buddy. The first 4 nights were normal. I mumbled, shifted in bed, and Buddy breathed. The recordings were boring. I doubted Mia's reaction. I convinced myself I kept recording because something in me kept pushing me to. On the 5th night, I didn't think much of it as I set my phone up before bed. My sleep was normal. The next morning, I went about my routine. I decided to listen to it during my lunch break. I was expecting more of the same background noises, but at 3 a.m., things took a terrifying turn. I heard a low, deep, distorted voice. I paused the recording, thinking my ears must have been playing tricks on me. I rewound it and hit play again, focusing hard on the audio. The growl returned, getting louder until it said my name, Aaron. The voice was distorted and unnatural, making me feel uneasy. It didn't sound like me. My first thought was that the recording was faulty. I tried to ignore it, but the voice kept coming back to me. Then I realized that Buddy wasn't at home that night. Mia had taken him to her mom's house after she left, and I forgot about the loud breathing I'd been hearing in the recordings. I thought it was Buddy, but it couldn't have been. I hadn't been hearing him. I started to panic. I listened to the recordings from the week before. The breathing was there, but so was a faint voice. I had brushed it off, thinking it was Buddy being restless at the foot of my bed. But now I knew the truth. Buddy wasn't there. Something else was. I sat there staring at my phone. I realized the breathing wasn't Buddy's. The voice wasn't mine. The more I replayed the 5th night's recording, the more unsettled I became. My mind raced with questions. If it wasn't me or Buddy, then who was making those noises? I called Mia. She asked if she should be talking to me. I didn't waste any time. Mia, I've been recording myself while I sleep. There's something on the recordings. I said, there's breathing and a voice. Says my name. You said you left because of my sleep talking. What did you hear? For a moment, there was only silence. I could hear her breathing. Mia, please, I begged. What did you hear? She sighed, her voice shaking. I didn't tell you because I thought you'd think I was crazy. But it wasn't just your sleep talking that freaked me out. I started hearing another voice at night. It was deep and didn't sound like you. I thought I was imagining it, but it kept happening. That's why I left. My blood ran cold. She heard the voice too. It was the same voice on the recordings. My stomach twisted with fear and confusion. Did you ever hear it say anything? I asked. There was a long pause before she answered. Said your name, Aaron. It wasn't you. I couldn't take it anymore. I was about to ask more when she cut me off. Her voice was tense. Aaron, I can't talk about this anymore. I'm sorry, but I can't. She hung up. I stared at my phone. My heart was pounding. Mia had heard it too. This wasn't a glitch or my imagination. Something else was in the house with me. The voice that Mia heard was the same one in my recordings. I still didn't understand what was happening. I knew I wasn't alone in the house. Despite my instincts, I couldn't stop. I set up my phone again to figure out what was haunting me. The house felt different that night. It was colder and darker. I felt like it was pressing in on me. I felt something was off in bed, but I was tired and fell asleep. The next morning, I woke with a sense of dread. I stared at my phone, wondering if I could handle hearing that voice again. I opened the recording and pressed play. It was the usual sounds, but then it started again. At 3 a.m., the strange breathing began. It was louder and more insistent. My stomach twisted as I listened. I knew what was coming next. It was Aaron. The voice was unmistakable. It was deep and distorted. It sounded like something speaking through static. This time, it didn't stop with my name. My breath caught in my throat. The voice continued, "Come downstairs." I stopped the recording. My hands were trembling. It was clearer than ever. It sounded like someone or something was in the room with me. It was me. I sat frozen, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the mind. Then I heard it again. Aaron. It was coming from downstairs. My body went cold. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end. The voice was unmistakable. I didn't know what to do. Run. Hide. Pretend I hadn't heard it. But the voice spoke again. The voice was slow and deliberate, as if daring me to listen. Come downstairs. I didn't move. My mind raced with panic, trying to find a logical explanation. There was no one else in the house. I've been alone for days. I didn't know where the courage came from, but somehow I managed to stand. My feet felt heavy, but I forced myself to walk toward the stairs. The house was silent except for my heartbeat. I reached the top of the stairs and called out. I could feel a presence waiting for me. I took the first step down, feeling the floorboard jolt me with each step. My heart raced as I reached the bottom. The air grew colder and thicker. I felt something unseen lurking just out of sight. The darkness seemed to pulse around me, suffocating and silent. Then, just as I reached the last step, I heard it again. Aaron. It was right behind me. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my breath shallow and my pulse racing. The living room stretched out in front of me, dimly lit by the glow of the street lights outside. Everything seemed normal, but the air was thick and oppressive. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. I took a step forward, scanning the room for any sign of movement. My phone was clenched in my hand, the recording still open. The silence was deafening, broken only by the refrigerator in the kitchen. I slowly moved toward went to the living room, half expecting something to jump out at me. I heard another sound, another creak. My blood ran cold as I turned toward the basement door. It was closed, but something was different. The door looked out of place. The air around it seemed to shimmer. Aaron, the voice came again. It was clear and distorted. This time it was louder. It wasn't coming from my phone or my head. It was coming from the basement. I froze. My heart was pounding. The basement was always creepy. Now it felt like a black hole. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I went down there, I wouldn't come back. The voice called again. It was more insistent. Aaron, come down. I turned backward. My body was screaming at me I ran, but the basement door opened a little. I could see a little bit of darkness. The house seemed to be calling me in. I felt scared and wanted to know what was down there. The voice had been calling my name for days. Couldn't ignore it. I took a breath and went to the basement door. My instincts told me to turn back, but I reached out and opened the door. It was cold and dark, but I could hear the voice. It was clearer now. It was calling me. It said, "Aaron, come down," with my phone's flashlight on. I took the first step down the wooden stairs. Each one creaked louder than the last. My heart was pounding. I held my breath and inched down into the dark basement. The light from my phone barely cut through the darkness. When I reached the bottom, I swept the light across the room. Everything looked normal. I could feel the air pressing down on me. In the far corner of the basement, I saw a figure. It was tall and hunched, its face hidden by shadows. I could hear it breathing deeply. It slowly stepped forward, and I saw its face. It wasn't human. I searched the basement, but the house seemed to have swallowed whatever presence had been there. I checked the basement. It was empty, but I still felt watched. I checked the doors and windows. They were locked. There was no sign of forced entry or misplaced objects. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of panic. Something was wrong. My mind was racing. Stress, lack of sleep. Maybe Mia leaving had messed with. I was more scared than I thought I could be. I wasn't alone, and whatever was here wasn't human. I needed proof to know if I was right or wrong. So I did what any logical person would do. I set up my phone to record video, not audio. I positioned it on the dresser to capture the room. I climbed into bed, and the house was quiet. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, trying to block out the dread. Every sound made my heart race. My mind was I kept telling myself that I'd watch the video tomorrow and everything would make sense. But I still felt uneasy. I lay in the darkness, waiting for something to happen. After what felt like hours, I finally fell asleep. When morning came, I woke up feeling disoriented. I grabbed my phone and hit play. The video was uneventful. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe there was nothing to be afraid of. After all, but then around 3 a.m. something changed. The air seemed to shimmer, and the shadows near the door began to move. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The shadows seemed to form a shape, something tall, hunched, and unnatural. Then I heard it, the same distorted voice from the recordings. Low and guttural. "Aaron, come downstairs." The voice didn't just echo in the recording. I could hear it clearly outside my room. The next morning, I picked up my phone. I didn't want to watch the video. I could barely stomach it. My hands trembled as I opened a file and pressed play. At first, it was the same as always. The video showed me tossing and turning in bed. At 3 a.m., things took a turn. I heard heavy breathing, but the blankets on my bed were still. I wasn't moving. The air felt heavy through the screen. Then the door opened slowly. I stared at the screen, frozen in place. The door had been shut, but now it was opening on its own. A shadowy figure slipped through the crack of the door. It was tall and distorted. It hovered at the foot of my bed, completely still except for its breathing. My breath hitched as I realized that it was standing right next to where I slept. The figure stood there for what felt like an eternity. It didn't move. It just stood there, towering over me. Then it leaned down closer to the camera. My heart pounded as its breath filled the audio. It whispered, "On, come downstairs." The voice was deep, distorted, and real. I could hear it in the video, but I also remembered hearing it in my room that night. I stopped the video. My hand was shaking. My mind was racing. What was this thing? Was it real? Was it a hallucination? I replayed the video several times, trying to find a logical explanation. The shadow remained. The voice remained. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was a glitch in the video. But I knew it wasn't. This thing had been in my room. It had called my name. I went to my room and it called my name. I couldn't stay in the house. I needed to get out and figure out what to do next. I packed a bag and left. I didn't know if I'd ever want to return. As I stepped out the door, I thought about what the voice had told me to do. What would have happened if I had listened? My stomach dropped. She had been hearing the same voice and feeling the same presence long before I noticed. She left without warning. That's what haunted me the most. She had fled to protect herself, But in doing so, she had left me behind in a house with something I couldn't understand. I asked her what the voice had said. She hesitated, her voice shaky. It told me my name and sometimes to go downstairs. It sounded like it was inside the walls. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Could there be someone hiding in the house? The shadow wasn't human. It moved and breathed in a strange way. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I was frustrated. I didn't understand why. She kept this for me. I thought you wouldn't believe me, she admitted. When I started hearing it every night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I sat in silence for a moment, my mind racing. If she had been hearing the voice for weeks before leaving, then this thing had been in the house for a long time. It was getting bolder after hanging up. Couldn't stay still. I started researching sleep paralysis. I looked for explanations, but nothing fit. This wasn't my imagination or a medical condition. Mia heard it too. As I searched online, I found a post in an old paranormal thread. Someone else had recorded themselves sleeping and heard strange breathing and whispers. In the night, the poster said the voice started as a whisper calling their name. Over time, it became more demanding. It didn't just whisper. It gave commands. It lured them into parts of the house they wouldn't normally go to. Dark rooms, the basement, and other scary places. Every time they followed the voice, something terrible happened. I read that line again and again. The voice had been calling me downstairs for nights now. I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep running from this thing, but I wasn't sure if I could face it either. The urge to leave the house was growing, but something kept me there. I knew I couldn't ignore the voice any longer. The house felt more. It was like the house was waiting for me to take the next step. Whatever was haunting me wasn't finished yet. I couldn't ignore the escalating horror, so I called Matt, an old friend who had spent years investigating the paranormal. He was my best bet to make sense of what was happening. He said he'd be there that night. He arrived with lots of equipment, including cameras, audio recorders, and EMF detectors. He said he'd seen a lot of strange stuff over the years, but this sounded different. We spent hours testing for electromagnetic spikes, but nothing unusual showed up. The air was thick with tension. As midnight approached, I felt uneasy as I walked closer to the house. Around 3 a.m., the house fell silent. Matt and I exchanged uneasy glances as we sat in the living room waiting. Then it happened. Aaron came downstairs, but this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a deep growl that seemed to reverberate through the walls. The lights flickered and the room was cast in shadows as the voice repeated, "On, come downstairs." Matt's face drained of color, and I could see fear in his eyes. He snapped out of it and pulled me to my feet. "We need to leave," he said. I wanted to argue, but my body refused to move. The voice echoed in my mind, almost compelling me to obey. My legs felt heavy. The house seemed to come alive. The walls creaked, shadows flickered, and I felt a presence closing in. The air grew colder. I felt the same oppressive feeling from before, but now it was stronger. Something was here. Aaron and Matt grabbed my arms and pulled me toward the front door. We ran out of the house. Outside, the night air hit me like a shock of cold water. I finally felt like I could breathe again. Matt was already on his phone trying to get in touch with someone who could help us. This isn't a normal haunting. It's something worse. I could still hear the voice in my head calling me back inside. It was loud and angry. "What the hell is it?" I asked. Matt looked at me. "Graham, I don't know, but it's not going to stop." Matt and I ran for the door. The temperature dropped, and the growl followed us. I grabbed my keys and left. We got into my car and drove away. I started the engine and we drove fast down the dark street. My hands were shaking. Matt was pale and shaking too. We didn't speak. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw. When I saw it in my window, it was the same figure from the video. It stood still, watching us drive away. Even from this distance, I could feel its presence. I slammed the mirror up, my heart racing. I choked out, "Did you see that?" Matt was already shaking his head. He said, "Just keep driving." We drove for hours. Neither of us looked back. My house was far behind us, but I felt the presence of whatever had been in there. Couldn't shake it. Every corner, every empty street light, made me feel like it was watching, waiting to reach out and pull me back. We didn't stop until we were miles away, parked in a lot. We sat in the car at an all-night diner, staring ahead. The adrenaline was wearing off. I could still hear my heart beating in my ear. Couldn't go back. I finally whispered, "It's dangerous. It wants something. I don't know what it is," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not sticking around to find out." Matt glanced over at me. "You can stay at my place for now." I wasn't sure there was a rational explanation for what I'd seen. I knew one thing for certain. I was never going back to that house. Whatever was inside wasn't human, and I wasn't willing to fight or reason with it. The next day, I called a realtor and put the house on the market. I packed. I left as much as I could, never going back at night. I moved far away. I didn't want to know. Whatever that thing was, it was no longer my problem. I had escaped. I closed that chapter of my life. I still hear it sometimes, in the quiet of the night.